Gibson's here, and we'll take some calls for the congressman. Our phone number 476-1300, 476-1300, our telephone number. Tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind, Chris. We hear about this thing called the Tea Party. All right. As a Republican, how much are they calling your office? Do people stop you in the hallways? Do they make appointments to meet with you that represent the Tea Party? Because I hear a lot of different variations of it, but you're dealing with these different groups in Washington all the time.
Yeah.
Who do you know who they are? Do you know what they stand for?
Well, I feel very in touch with all my constituency. I'll just tell you, when I'm not in Washington, I'm all over the 165 towns. I have actually over 1,000 village hamlets and towns, and I've been in all of them, moving all about, listening to folks. And I've got Occupy Wall Street to Tea Party and everybody in between. Mm-hmm. So I feel very much in touch with the positions, the arguments, the recommendations from the full spectrum of political ideology. Mm-hmm. And look, at the end of the day, I'm looking to grow this economy, right, so that every American gets a shot at the American dream, to get back to a balanced budget, mm-hmm, so that future generations get the same choices and freedoms that we've had, and to protect freedoms. Okay. You know, from threats from abroad, but also from encroachment here at home, standing strong on the Bill of Rights. So, you know, I think that is a message that unites everyone, whether you be in the Tea Party or the Occupy Wall Street.
I got that. I'm with that. I got you.
Yeah.
But I'm just, I'm curious about, do the folks come to your office and say to you, okay,
I get it.
They come in, they meet with you, they say, Congressman, we want you to do, we represent the Tea Party, we want you to vote this way or vote that way, right?
Oh, I get a Tea Party, I get Occupy Wall Street, I get people all
you get all
in
that.
the...
all right, I got it.
But it's not just in Washington, by the way. Most of my meetings actually take place here in the district.
All right.
And then I also do teletown halls, so I get people, up to 12,000 people on the line, and I can hear from them.
Tell me one more quick thing, I'll take some calls. Are you watching that situation in Nevada? Does that have your attention at all?
Actually, I don't know a lot about it, but what I do know really disturbs me.
Which part? Harry Reid, his son? That's disturbing. The fact that the son's got some, looks like some business deals with some
very concerning. But when I talk about standing strong on the Bill of Rights, I mean the entire Bill of Rights, including, and if you think about our Declaration and the Constitution and private property. Right. So due process of law is something that is very important to all of us.
Are we, listen, my opinion is yes, but in your opinion, are we jumping over the Constitution as it's written in many cases?
I think we are, but I want to tell you something. I think it's both parties.
I agree. I agree with you on that.
I see it in both parties, and that's why there are times.
But it's much more the Democratic Party.
I think that's true. Yeah, I believe that's true. But I'll tell you, there are times when I see amendments come to the floor from Republicans, and it steps on states' rights. Now, not to say that there aren't times when you need federal policy. I get that. But I look at an amendment, I'm like, why is this a Republican amendment?
Right.
And I vote no. If I don't think it's good for upstate New York, I have two basic questions. One, is it constitutional? And the second is it good for upstate New York? If it's good for upstate New York, I'm going to vote for it if it's constitutional. I don't care if a Democrat or a Republican brought it forward. And incidentally, if it's not constitutional or if it's not good for upstate New York, I'm going to vote against it, regardless of whether it's a Republican or Democrat that brought it forward.
Congressman Gibson's here. Let me get some of these folks in. Brad's online. I don't know where he's calling from, but Brad's online listening this morning. Brad, how are you today?
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Congressman.
Hi, Brad.
I'm listening to your stream from Dallas, Paul.
Thank you.
Congressman, I've got a question on the discussion that you had with Paul earlier on this Russia-Ukraine issue. Obviously, it's very serious and has a lot of serious ramifications. You mentioned sanctions, and from the news reports I listened to, there seems to be reluctance by our European allies to get on board with sanctions. Can you speak to what you see as their concern or the reason why maybe they're not quick to get on board with that? And then as a second part of that, if it has to do with energy dependence on Russia, is the United States in a position to be able to help supply energy? I'm going to hang up.
Thank you very, very much. Let me before you answer the sanctions and the European country, it gets back to what I was asking about. The European nations have come in and they've said that they've voiced a concern to the U.S. about what's going on with Putin because they're concerned he's going to start moving through the Ukraine into other areas. I get what they're saying. But at the same time, the caller is right, Chris. They don't seem to want to get on board with the things, with the detriments that got to be put in place to try to stop this. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, well, I think that's basically true. And Brad's, I think, got his finger right on part of the issue. and that is the reliance of most of Europe on resources from Russia. What I have said is that I guess it comes from this perspective that all of life can be classified into some form of game theory. And if you're constantly making decisions, thinking that this is the last iteration, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. If you're a decision maker in Europe and you're basing your sole decision on whether or not to stand up to Putin based on your situation at the moment, with regard to
Politics.
well, even reliance on resources from Russia, then you have to be able to deal with the fact that 2 or 3 iterations down the line, you may be staring at Russian tanks right across your
That's
valley.
right. My concern is that nobody's going to stand up here because I don't see our leadership in Washington really standing up militarily at this point. Do you?
Well, again, I think we can peacefully resolve this, but it really gets back to what Reagan talked about, peace through strength. If you project strength, there's a better chance that you're going to get peacefully resolved. If you project weakness, then the chances of fighting go up.
Okay.
So, and I know that may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but you can just look at the history of mankind and think about high school. Did anybody walk up to the biggest person in high school and go up and just knock them one right in the nose?
Right.
You just
No,
didn't see it happen.
It didn't happen.
You didn't see it happen.
So it doesn't sound like you're optimistic about the announcement from NATO yesterday either.
But it's not done yet. I mean, there's still time. What needs to happen is sort of what I laid out earlier. And by the way, Brad, I need to answer the rest of your question. I do think the rest of the world can play a role in addressing the concerns that Europeans have in terms of access to energy. I think that can be done not only with the United States, but really across the globe. But what needs to happen, we need to get the leadership of the G7 together. NATO certainly plays a role here as well, and to be precise in our language. Again, I've been recommending that what we say is we're not saying that Russia doesn't have legal points. We're not saying that. We're just saying that the way they went about it is absolutely unacceptable. That they would use military force to go into Crimea. And the situation in Ukraine, what needs to happen is to de-escalate right now and to find ways to strengthen civil institutions. I mean, it's a very complicated situation, actually, because some of the military forces that Alpha, which is their special operations unit in Ukraine, they were sent to Eastern Europe to help pacify or to bring stability back. Well, they're already feeling questioned because the former Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, was using them in Kiev only 2 months ago. So, they're feeling a little bit tenuous in their own situation in relation to civil-military relations.
I got
it. Look, there's a lot of complexity bearing on the problem, but that's why I want to get it back to the 2 points we said at the outset. The issues are what Russia did and the sanctions, the penalties that they need to face for that, and then the situation in Ukraine, having that situation peacefully de-escalated.
Bill and Troy is next with Congressman Gibson at 8:45. Bill, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Congressman Gibson. On your teletown halls, there's no warning for them. They just, all of a sudden your phone rings at 6:30. And I've tried numerous times on your teletown halls, but unless it's a softball question from the right, you don't get them.
That's not true. That's not true, Bill, at all.
It's true.
Bill, hey, Bill, what's your question?
What's your question?
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Your office and your website for your campaign. You don't have town halls. I've been to your town halls. You hide in an office in the back, and you won't take questions.
All right, now hold on a second. Chris, hold on a second.
Yeah, what
are your town halls? Talk about your town
I'm
halls.
out with people all the time. I know who this guy is, too. Go ahead. What's your question? You got
question
comments, but
is,
what's your question?
Is your website or your campaign page going to announce a town hall? The last statement on your website is March 12th, sir. Okay. You are in hiding.
All right, hold on a second.
I am out all the time.
All right, thanks for the call. You want to respond to it?
I'm
talking about your town halls.
I am out in my communities.
Our congressional representatives in this area are all both visible. Very visible.
Thank you, though.
Phil and East Greenbush.
And let me just tell you, his big issue is guns. And he's of the belief that if you take guns from people, we're going to be a safer society.
Okay. Phil and East Greenbush is next with Congressman Gibson, 8:47. Phil, how are you?
Good, good. Congressman Gibson, the previous caller had stole my thunder a little bit about the geopolitical importance of Keystone Pipeline and hydrofracking, including the state of New York and the policies being counterproductive to our military security. But I'd love to hear your comment about that or further elaborate on that. But I also wonder about accountability of the Obama administration. It seems to me that the Obama administration is sort of like rogue at this point. They just do whatever they want, whenever they want. Fast and Furious being one of the prime examples. Lois Lerner and the IRS being another. And, I just would like your comments about that and what Congress is planning to do to rein in, perform their function and rein in this administration, which seems to have gone totally rogue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. So here's what we did. Several weeks ago, we brought forward a couple bills that would clarify the process by which we would hold the executive accountable of either party. And as the caller points out, lots of concerns about the Obama administration's enforcement of the law, which by Constitution, that's the executive branch's role, is to faithfully carry out the law. Let me just say that as somebody who studied history, this is not a phenomenon that's peculiar to one particular party, but it is most contemporaneous right now dealing with the Obama administration. So, this was Trey Gowdy's bill, representative from South Carolina, that would lay out the process by which we could get a judgment from the Supreme Court. Because one of the frustrations that I think anyone who's concerned about the Constitution has is whenever there's been this standoff between the executive and legislative branches and it goes to the Supreme Court is actually loath to get involved. They often say, well, that's a political question. You guys got to sort it through. And so what we're trying to do with the Enforce Act is actually get to a point where we can get a judgment, if there needs to be a judgment, in a dispute between the executive and legislative branch. Now, I want to tell you, I actually had an amendment to that bill, which was ruled out of order, which I was not pleased with at all, that had to do with how we go to war. I've been working on this issue since 2011, that, we should be following the Constitution as far as if a situation is serious enough that we're going to use force, then the American people should have a say in that through their representatives. There should be a debate and there should be a vote. And so I had an amendment to the Enforce Act that would have clarified that, what the process would be so that we could get a Supreme Court judgment. Because 8 times since the War Powers Act of 1973 was enacted, we the people, through our representatives, have brought legal case against the president for not following the War Powers Act, and we've never successfully got a judgment. So, this is one I'm going to continue to stay on, but I'll tell the caller here that, look, this is not an easy road here, because when we pass legislation to rein in the president, the Senate doesn't take it up. So elections have consequences, and one or more reason why we need to do well in November.
Darrell Issa is one of your colleagues, your Republican colleague from California. He is also the head of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He's been under attack for aggressively pursuing answers from Lois Lerner. Tell me a little bit about who hid behind obviously hid her answers. She didn't want to. She's embracing her constitutional rights by not answering questions. Should we have been more aggressive? Should there be a federal grand jury investigation into Ms. Lerner? What are your thoughts on that? Or do you think she was okay?
No, I'm concerned about justice. I don't think we're not to the end of this issue. I know that there are still investigation ongoing, and I believe you're going to see more on this. In fact, subcommittee, I think, has actually moved on contempt for Ms. Lerner.
Well, it is contempt.
Yeah.
It is.
So, look, there's a process in place here for us to follow.
Well, I think ICE has also been wrongly portrayed here. He's trying to get answers. That's all it seems like he's trying to do. They were using clearly, I say clearly, maybe that's a little too strong, but in my opinion, they were using the powers of the IRS to go after groups that the government, that the White House simply did not adhere to. They did not embrace.
Well, and the point is this, is that there's an expectation in our country that if you break the law, that you're going to be held accountable
Correct.
for breaking
Correct.
the law. So, I mean, we're not to the end of this conversation.
Let's get Elliot in here next. Elliot's on the air with Congressman Chris Gibson. Elliot, how are you?
I've met you, Congressman, a few times. The senior citizen center over here in Skorak and a few other places.
Oh, hey, how are you?
Not too bad. Hey, you know what's been on my mind when it comes to the national security of the United States? The basic economy and our manufacturing base being shipped to China. That's what's on my mind. That's one of the reasons. And the other reason, we seem to, in Washington, D.C., and I'm not talking specifically about the Republicans, but the Democrats and the present administration, to me, they've done everything humanly possible to, I don't know, sort of destroy not only the economy, but destroy the defensive posture of the United States of America. And I think when we deal with the communist Chinese, who, by the way, as far as I know, and you tell me whether I'm right or wrong or not, but I think the Russians and the Chinese have some kind of a military pact between the two of them and an economic pact.
Okay, thank you
Would
very
you
much. Are you
please
concerned
answer
about a potential conspiracy there
Well-
between the Russians and the Chinese?
Well, thank you, Elliot, for calling in, and good to hear from you again. So, a couple things that Elliot's raised. One has to do with the manufacturing base of our country, and I want to address that. And the second has to do with geopolitical our approach to the world. And I'll tell you this, my read of this is that China is actually a wild card. I don't think anybody's, they are a very convoluted country when it comes to understanding their interests and into advancing them. I don't think that they're in collusion with Russia. And I also think that that is a country that is quickly recognizing that if they don't become more like us, then they're going to have internal strife. They have major labor issues right now. They have significant environmental issues. They got million-person cities with no one in them. You know, they had a command-directed economy. And, the growth that they had only a half dozen years ago or so, they're not seeing it today. And I think the best way to deal with China is to be firm in our trade policy with them. They have been ripping off our intellectual property. That's unacceptable, and they need to know that. They've been artificially inflating. They have been manipulating their currency to essentially give advantage to their producers, their
You
manufacturers.
concerned about a relationship with the Chinese?
I am, but not to the point where.
Not with the Russian. Not to the point of where we are with the Russians.
Well, here's why. Here's the concern I
Go
have
ahead.
is that we've been coddling Chinese. What we need to do is insist upon them treating us the way that we treat them.
Right.
So when they rip off our intellectual property
Right.
and when they manipulate their currency,
What Trump says.
what's that?
What Donald Trump has been saying.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really true. I mean,
Sure.
now some say, well, we don't want to do anything because we'll start a trade war. Well, what are we in now? We're in something. We're in some kind of trade skirmish then. But and I think that there are ways that we can insist upon them treating us the way that we treat them.
I agree with you.
Now, the other point was an important one Ellie raised was the manufacturing base, and I'm telling you, I'm talking to you as the son of a mechanic from the building trades. You know, when folks talk about income inequality, the best way to deal with income inequality, and that is we're talking about the middle class, is to reindustrialize and to bring manufacturing base back to the United States of America, so that we're a self-reliant, we're an independent nation. You know, when we went through transformation in our economy, there was a lot of theory out there that we're going to move to information and services. You're going to see GDP growth, and look, a lot of that did come to fruition. But the problem is this: is you don't have a healthiness in your economy with middle-class jobs, and you also have issues that you become dependent on other nations. So, getting manufacturing base back here will not only make us more independent, but it will also who actually performs those jobs. It's the folks who generally make $60,000 to $80,000 a year with benefits and some form of a pension. We call that the middle class.
Yep.
So now, let me say this. I mentioned China, and I mentioned Japan a little bit earlier, because when I was a young man, people said Japan was going to economically bury us. That never happened.
No.
And then, folks are saying, well, China's going to economically bury us. That isn't going to happen either. Because the major issues that I pointed out that they have. If we make some of the right decisions, and the decisions we need to make are on tax policy, regulatory policy, and trade policy, if we get a level playing field for our producers, we're gonna crush the rest of the world. I mean, we're positioned to have our best century yet.
Okay, very good. Listen, it's good to see you.
Good to be with
Thanks
you,
for
Paul.
coming. I know we're
Thank
out of
you.
time. We're out of time. Great to see you.
It's
Congressman
great to be
Gibson.
with you. Thank you, everybody.
Congressman Gibson, everybody. We'll be back in a moment on Talk 1300.